Special thanks to Chaplain Randy Kitchens for your trust and allowing me to come up here and speak to this group. To trust me is what one of the ancestors of my tradition calls a reach in a dark tent. To trust, to have faith. Thanks to you, to Chaplain Runnels, who's been a project officer in hospitality to me. It was leaked to me that last year at this event, the 15th Chief of Chaplains was a speaker. It was Chaplain Major General Charles Baldwin. He's the 15th, I'm the 17th, which leads me to ask, did Cecil turn you down? Yeah, because he's not saying anything. He's just, oh yeah. I'm deeply grateful. I served under Chaplain Richardson as his deputy, and he trusted me from the very beginning. One of the greatest gifts he gave was trust. My apprenticeship was brief, and Chaplain Richardson from the beginning looked at me and said, "This is yours, H." And when he retired, he said to me, "I will never call you. I will never give you tips on how to run the Chaplain Corps. It's yours. But you can call me anytime." And I did. And he kept his promise. I am deeply grateful to Chaplain Richardson. To the rest of you, I have a bit of advice today for those who will be retiring. That's all of you. You don't get to do this for life. The time will come when Congress or somebody else will say it's time for you to go. Chaplain Bobby Page is one of my favorite people I've ever known. I didn't like Chaplain Page. I loved Chaplain Page. The rest of the people with whom I was blessed to work and the chiefs of staff under whom I served, General Schwartz and General Welsh, were some of the finest human beings I've ever known. I loved being a chaplain. I loved the job I had. I wish I could do it for life. But the time comes when someone will say it's time for you to go. The best way to go is with gratitude. I loved every day, and I was 155 pounds. When I retired, I was 155 pounds, and I was very devoted to making every PT test a 100% test, and Chaplain Page joined me in that. And we would work out together, we would run together, and stay as fit as we could in the Pentagon gym. And one of the things I loved about Chaplain Page was his sense of humor that was gentle, except when we did PT. And we were running together. We were doing our PFT test at the Pentagon gym. And we had our little outfits on. Are you familiar with those? You know, the shorts that look good on no one. Julian has seen me in those. And we were running, and Chaplain Page looked at me and he said, "Sir, are those your legs, or are you riding a chicken?" It didn't end there. And I did retire, and unfortunately Chaplain Page was compelled to retire too. Not for any reason other than an error, a clerical error in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2008, which extended general officers beyond age 64. What they forgot to include was our career field. So when it came time for him to meet a promotion board, it was denied for no reason except a clerical error in the NDAA from years before. It was corrected, but only after political machinations among those who simply could not agree. Things with which we have to contend to this day. It's my role, one of them today, to tell you how much I revered and loved the people with whom I worked. And Chaplain Page and Julian and all the rest are really at the top of that list. You are the dearest people to me other than those who are of my own family. When time did come to retire, I did some academic things for a while. Now I'm just Jesus' little helper in San Antonio, Texas. I am pastor of a church, medium-sized church in San Antonio, and I love it. I'm very happy to be there. I had some wonderful offers in the academic world. I was very happy to look at those, and I was told that my spouse said, "Fine, I'll come visit you." I live in San Antonio, Texas. I had my first physical in retirement years. I had a physical from an Air Force physician after retirement, and she was very young. I was in the examining room when she entered, and she had data from my retirement physical and data from that day. And they were, shall we say, at variance with one another. I told you 155 pounds, max my PT. The weight when I had that physical on that day was approaching a number that began with a 2. And she looked at the retirement physical, and she looked at today's data, and I'm sitting naked on the examining table. I think she was 14 years old. She's very Latin, beautiful Hispanic woman, and very young. And she came over and stuck her index finger into my belly to about the second knuckle, and she said, "Tortillas." Who doesn't love Mexican cuisine? It's one of the reasons I love San Antonio, Texas. So get ready. It happens. Look in the mirror, and one day it'll be like me. I always wanted a full-length mirror in the house. I never seemed to get one. Important to have a full-length mirror on active duty in the military because you want to look at your uniform. How do I look? Am I presenting myself appropriately? Whatever our pay grade, you want to present yourself professionally. I never had one. I've got one now. Unfortunately, it's outside my shower. It's a vision of, remember Alvin and Heidi Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock. It's right outside my shower. As I think of these things that are lighthearted and amusing, I think back to my years of active duty. I loved every year. I loved every day. And the days that were the most formidable were maybe the most important. When the conditions were austere, when we lost air crew during Operation Desert Shield, when I picked up the body parts of those, one of whom I had baptized the week before. People whom I absolutely loved and lived with in that very austere setting. The most austere was maybe the most intimate and precious. When sitting across from the House Armed Services Committee, and they're screaming for my neck, for Mark Tidd, and for my colleague in the Army, maybe that was the most important day. To defend the religious freedoms of everyone who wants to put their hand in the air and say, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I will take 4 years of my life, or 40 years, or whatever you're willing to give. What a pleasure and privilege it has been. I think it was easier for me, for Chaplain Page, and for all of us who served together in leading the Chaplain Corps. We served and we led in a time of war. I think you lead and serve in a time when this nation is at war with itself. That is the issue I want to address today. A nation at war with itself, and how can you continue to lead in the way that is unique? I think the Air Force Chaplain Corps, whether chaplain or NCO, whatever role you have, it is unique. It's a model for all of us who can live together with persons with whom we may disagree, but whom we love and respect. It is a dramatic difference. I'm a parish pastor now. I serve a congregation in San Antonio that is diverse, I suppose, as they look at themselves in a San Antonio way, but not like you. Not as brilliant and as gifted and willing to engage with one another as you. I want to talk about that. I want to share with you the word that I use more often than any other, I think, when I was still on active duty, and that is the virtue that becomes more winsome to me with every day of service and ministry, and that's fidelity. That to which you are called is to be faithful. The Marine Corps has one thing right, semper fidelis, to be always faithful to that which you are called. Fidelity that begins, first of all, with that which is eternal in your life, your relationship with your Creator, with God, however you understand that. That is the free exercise of religion, the First Amendment entitlement that is the driver of this Corps and every person's role who wears a uniform in this room. It is devotion to that. It is devotion to your lifelong fidelities in your family. And then somewhere along the line thereafter, it's fidelity also to the Constitution that you swear to uphold and defend. The Air Force has an executive transition assistance program. Chaplain Kitchens and I talked about that a little in the green room. I took the executive transition assistance program. I think it's called the GO assistance or transition program. And I took it. I listened. I did that twice, just as I was told. I think it was largely an exercise in how wide your tie should be and whether you should wear cap-toe or wingtip shoes in your interview as a general officer seeks employment for high wages in the defense industry. That's how I read it. I dealt with it. It just didn't seem to apply to me. It was tough for me because I saw a tremendous cultural rift to which those leaders of the ETAP alerted me, that when you go into the civilian world, you will not see the core values that you saw when you were in uniform. And they wanted to prepare us for that. There is a reality there that seems to elude us. It eluded me for the larger part of my adult life, which I was blessed to spend in uniform with you. The son of a Navy guy, son-in-law of a Navy guy. I was going to go in the Navy, but then this Air Force thing seemed to work out okay. My sons are not military. They're not clergy. My sons also served with the family. We had assignments at Lackland and the Air Force Academy, so I think they believed that military life was largely being screamed at and doing push-ups. So none of the three of my boys are in the military. But they have shared with me also their chagrin that the driver of the ethics in the business world is how much money can I make before next Tuesday? And the core values are really profit and, shareholder value. Those are the things that drive business in America. How much money can I make before next Tuesday? Make it fast, make it easy. And employment and loyalty and fidelity don't seem to obtain. Some of my sons have been with our firms a good while. Some have moved from one to another. But the Harvard Business Review says that people serve with companies now an average of about the length of a PCS tour for us in military. 2, 3, 4 years, and they're on to another company. That loyalty doesn't seem to go both ways either. When the core value is profit instead of fidelity, it's not necessarily integrity. Average periods of civilian employment indicate that people, according to the Harvard Business Review last month, say people quit not their jobs, people quit their bosses. Well, that may be so. The Harvard Business Review likes to put a different turn on it. They say people quit their management, or they don't find their work fulfilling, and so they move on to another. But if they move on, they never find that which is fulfilling. I want to remind you that to which we cleave is that core value of fidelity, integrity, service, excellence. But I think for this core, what distinguishes us is fidelity to that which is eternal, beyond even the things of the Constitution, that which are lifelong, which are commitments to our loved ones. And then also, we swear an allegiance to support and defend the Constitution. I would say, be careful as you lead. Lead with love. That's a hard thing for me to say. I learned it from a Marine Corps Brigadier General, an infantry officer at UCOM, who gave a speech, and I won't recite so much of it as to bore you, but he grew up very poor in West Texas, and he didn't have a lot, but his mom and dad, he said, they loved us, and they cared for us. We didn't have much money. We had one baseball glove. We had one bike to ride, but mom and dad loved us, and we would do anything for mom and dad. So when he got to be an infantry officer in Vietnam as a lieutenant, he said, I did every push-up they did plus. I did every hard thing they did plus. I loved those people. When you love people, they will do anything for you. They will face fire. They will even die if you follow your core value of fidelity. You lead them with love. When I was on active duty, the A3 of the Air Force lived right down the street. A 3-star was invited to be commencement speaker at a particular military college in the state of South Carolina, which will be unnamed. They consider themselves the citadel, really, of military education. His commencement speech was entitled, printed in the bulletin of that school, the commencement address from Lieutenant General so-and-so. The title was, Don't Be an Asshole. Just having said that, I've already offended about a third of this room. Countless others if they're online, and I apologize for that. We all know what that word means, though. We all know what toxic leadership is, what self-interested leadership is. You have probably served at some time in your life, hopefully not in the Chaplain Corps, but you may have, a person whose interest is how much can I make before next Tuesday? What's in this for me? What's the short-term interest I have as opposed to the long-term interest of fidelity? If first I want to tell you about fidelity, secondly I want to say don't be that guy. I don't want to have a mathematical proof that proceeds by contradiction. You remember that from college. But that's kind of the second point. You know what that is. Don't be that. Lead with fidelity. Let your people see that you love them. If so, they will do anything for you. Don't be that guy. I want you to hear from me that the Chaplain Corps is not about you. I was blessed, Chaplain Page and I, to lead, I think, in a time that was easier. We led a corps in a time of war. You lead the Corps and the Air Force in a time, as I said, when the nation is at war with itself. How can you do that? I think the greatest challenges I face sometimes, I didn't have a lot of hard challenges. I remember Chaplain Page and I having lunch together on a Wednesday. We'd been together about 2 years. We didn't have a lot of times we had to rush down the hall in the E-ring to get to General Schwartz or General Welsh before a news clipping about an Air Force Chaplain Corps member hit the Air Force Times. And so we were sitting together having lunch on a Wednesday, and Chaplain Page said, "You were lucky, you and I, that we lead in a time when we don't have a lot of that problem." By the end of the week, we had 3. We pledged never again. We'll never talk like that again. But the thing that was vexatious is we had to contend with chaplains or NCOs who were more concerned with the furtherance or the advance of their own endorsement, their own religio-political position, as opposed to the airman or the guardian whom they served. If that's your position, if you are here to advance your own religio-political position and the others are all wrong, get out. Go away. I'm not saying that. I don't mean to be mean-spirited in any sense. I don't want it to sound like that. But this is not the place for the advancement of yourself. It is for the respect and dignity toward the people who join you in their oath of allegiance to support and protect the Constitution of the United States. It is not my job to grab people and make them into members of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Could you imagine what a dull place it would be? A bunch of 72-year-old bald-headed ectomorphs. I shudder to think. We are here to serve their free exercise of religion, which is not necessarily my own. I have learned from others the challenge for me is if your position becomes the absolute. If you're searching for that one must that you got to be just like me and all the others are wrong. Reinhold Niebuhr described that, the great systematician of the early 20th century, the ethicist. When you have only absolutes, mercy and grace go out the window. I think that is so for us. I loved being an Air Force chaplain. I miss the diverse political, pluralistic community, the diverse religious community that nurtured me for the better part of my adult life. I learned from you. I learned from Pentecostal chaplains, gospel congregations. When I was privileged to be their pastor for a period of time, they tolerated me magnificently. They nurtured and taught me through the music and the traditions of their worship style. They nurtured me. They taught me. My Muslim friends and colleagues, whether they were in the Middle East or here in the United States at the Raindrop Center in San Antonio or the Islamic Center of San Antonio, and throughout the places I've been in the Middle East, unashamedly will pray without embarrassment. Lutherans, we're almost embarrassed to pray in public. My Muslim friends will unashamedly go to the Lord in prayer 5 times a day and consider a representation of their faith. My Jewish colleagues, to me, having been minority groups throughout American history, are perhaps the most tolerant, beyond tolerant. And affirming the religious freedoms of others. None of these persons, Native American spiritualists at the United States Air Force Academy, none of these have ever been a threat to me. Instead, they have expanded my appreciation of spirituality in different ways that our Creator's grace can come to expression. The Chaplain Corps does it best, and I want to share that with you, now as an old retired guy who's a parish pastor again. The Chaplain Corps does it best. The Air Force Chaplain Corps does it best, because the model of interfaith life and the rubrics of the First Amendment require it. For the continuance of this career field, it must be not your way or the highway, but the First Amendment entitlement of every guardian and airman and their family. Chaplain Richardson always told me that he's a pastor to some, but he was the chaplain to all. I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten either that we are responsible to share the truth of our nation's history, and to cover that, or to put cosmetic on it so that we don't have to deal with it. We will fail in our diversity. In our nation, our HC Corps, as I was preparing to speak to you yesterday, I was reading Albert Roboteau's witness in his book, Slave Religion, the witness of a 19th century enslaved man named William Humbert. He was a fugitive in South Carolina, an enslaved man in the 19th century, who recalled vividly during his time of enslavement, he would walk for 2 hours with his family to a white slavers' church, where he would be given Holy Communion by a white slaver. He would have a 2-hour walk back to his home, and he recalled vividly, as he recited this, and eventually documented by Roboteau's work, that if they were a bit late in that 2-hour walk, the very hand that gave Holy Communion 2 hours prior would flog that person, whether male or female. And William Humbert recalls that some did not survive. The image in my mind that comes with vivid detail in reading that was the hand that held the cup and the other hand held the whip. That's part of the American story. The great Mandela taught us that we cannot have reconciliation until we first have truth. And if we obscure our nation's history, then we're the ones, I'm the one, who has the cup in one hand and the whip in the other. We will not have reconciliation until we have truth. To open the verity of human and American history so that we may overcome it with love for one another, to which we are called by our holy literature. And finally, you'd probably expect an old guy to come here and have my view of the future. What's coming next? I'm just Jesus' little helper in San Antonio. It's up to you. What I will share is the genius of Bina Venkataraman, a professor at MIT in science and technology. And she's written this beautiful work called The Optimist's Telescope, that the future, if we are to reconcile and live together into a future where there is as fractionally the level of abundance for our grandchildren as for us, it will require a foresight, an ability to look beyond how much we can make before next Tuesday, and what can we grant to those who come in generations to come. For therein is, I think, the truth of reconciliation for time. The message for a nation at war with itself is not an absolute of my position is right and yours is wrong. It's a position of what can we leave for those who come after. It's a legacy of fidelity. When I was chief, I visited the Naval Observatory here in D.C. And during that period of time, next to me stood the chief meteorologist of the United States Navy. And someone brought up a question to him. They said, what about this climate change? Is that real? And this erudite scientist of the United States Navy just laughed like it was Captain Obvious in that commercial. He said, this has been science for generations. This is truth. The Navy has known this a long time, and they know it best because of sea temperatures and currents that are more predictive in science for what is to come than anything else we can measure. That's what we have to look at. what is for generations to come, as opposed to what is the big event for me. Am I going to win the lotto? We want to know what is actual and operative for us before next Tuesday. This book will help us look beyond and see what is operative for generations to come, for therein will be the evidence of our fidelity for a longer time. It's really hard in a culture that looks right now for what is in it for me. And I think the dark side of our career field can be, what is my next promotion opportunity? I love this book. I would recommend it for your reading, The Optimist's Telescope. It's a beautiful piece of work. It's not religious, but it's prophetic. And in closing, I would share those, one especially, who taught me to take that long view, to take it with fidelity as my virtue, and what will be for the generations to come. Chaplain Colonel Steve Sill. I don't know if anybody remembers Steve Sill. First chaplain I met on active duty. I stayed with Steve and Linda when I formed from my parish life to active duty in the Air Force in the 1980s. Stayed with Steve and Linda. First one I met, Steve now lives behind me in rural Comal County, Texas, with his wife, Linda. Steve came when I was the commandant of the school, director of the school, whatever we call it now, Chaplain Corps College. And every basic chaplain corps asked the same question. Every class asked the same question. They'd ask it of Lorraine Potter when she was the chief and come visit. On this occasion, they asked Chaplain Sill, how do I get to be a colonel? Oh, they could see the pain in his face. You could see the pain in Chaplain Potter's face when she'd hear that question. When Chaplain Sill heard it, when they would sometimes cloak the question, how do I be successful? How do I get to be like you, a colonel? Chaplain Sill said, be careful how you measure success. People measure success not in the long run by what your pay grade is when you retire, but how do your children remember how you treated their mother, their father, their brother, those who were different than you? Did you love them? Did you respect them? Did you honor them? Did you seek justice for them who maybe had less power and influence than you? Chaplain Sill returned from a remote tour in Korea, from Gwangju, with a baby infant daughter with whom he fell in love when he was there. Surprised his wife, Linda. I got this. When he retired, that young lady, I don't know, was a scientist, a pharmacist, a physician, whatever she was at the time. In her tears, she said on behalf of her sister and brother, thank you, Daddy, you chose me. I don't know what would have happened to me in a Korean orphanage, but you chose me. Chaplain Sill knew what success was. It derives from fidelity. It derives from keeping that promise that is for a longer period of time than how much money you can make before next Tuesday. You are that hope, I think, for a nation at war with itself that can exemplify respect for one another, the quest for racial justice that begins with truth and only then moves to reconciliation and repair. It's not my chaplain corps, never was. Chaplain Richardson told me the same thing. He said, it's yours, H, but it's not mine. It's our Creator's. This nation is not mine. It's our Creator's. This world is not mine. All I have about the future to say is it's yours now. Take care of it. Take care of one another. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love one another and seek justice. And don't eat too many tortillas.
So, are you going to walk up while I ask the question?
Sure. Oh, I'll use this one. Oh, am I audible? Oh, please.
Thank you, sir. We have some questions that we'll ask, and some will be coming from the field. But the first question I will ask you is, how do you see the Chaplain Corps fortifying war fighters and their families?
People have always looked at me when I have been on deployment like I was on display. I felt very exposed in a sense. People look at the chaplain regardless of your denomination, gender, any other identity we present, pay grade. And we exemplify the career field because there's maybe one NCO and chaplain, maybe two in each deployed setting. And they will see, how do you treat one another? Do you treat in the officer-enlisted relationship with respect and dignity? Which is why I am very loath to call what we used to call chaplain assistants, chapel management personnel, religious affairs airmen, by their first name, if they're not comfortable calling me H. Very few are comfortable calling me H in my 70s now. In the same way, to exemplify respect and dignity for one another, for your colleagues, for each other. People will look at that and they will emulate disrespect or respect. The culture of the Air Force that I treasure is one of human dignity and respect. I will not speak ill of the sister services, but I will treasure the tradition I was handed by those who mentored me. The best way to support airmen, guardians, and their families in a deployed setting, in warfare, or in stress is how you conduct yourself. The best evangelism, if you're an evangelical type, is not an tract you hand out or a speech you have memorized, but the conduct of your life. Do you respect the partner in the team where you are deployed? People will see that, and they'll want that. Maybe that's the best way to support airmen and their families. How do we conduct ourselves in our own family? How do we conduct each other in partnership as a team?
Thank you, sir. Dr. Cornel West said, to lead the people, you must love the people. You spoke about love in your speech. And to love the people, you must listen to the people. So can you share an experience where you, in your leadership advisement, took it from a non-commissioned officer? And how did it assist you personally and professionally?
Oh gosh, almost every day. I'll go back to my first assignment at Lackland Air Force Base. I was a brand new captain. I never was a lieutenant. I was too old to be a lieutenant. So I was a captain. I'd been a parish pastor about 8 years. And at my first assignment, there was a young airman, about a A1C type. And his member's name was Adam Hill. I think when I was in my younger years, I thought more of myself than perhaps I ought to have thought. But so did Airman Hill. And he was quick to give advice to those of us who were the clergy, who were conducting services at Lackland. Huge congregations, if you ever served, we used to call it Chapel 8, but huge congregation serving primarily basic trainees and others. And basic training at that time had a population of almost 10,000 in those middle 80s. And Airman Hill said, "Let me tell you something about preaching there, chaplain. They don't need to hear a lot of theology from you when they're sitting there sweating or sleeping. They need to hear stories. Learn to tell them stories." I've never forgotten that. I'm preaching all the time now. I taught homiletics at a theological seminary. It's like Airman Hill is still talking to me. The integration, people aren't terribly interested in genitive construct chains in Hebrew exegesis. People aren't so interested in the pluperfect tense or the aorist tense of Greek verbs. They want to know, what does this mean for me? How does this story, how do you tell me a story where I am in my deployment or in the stress I'm having at home, in the midst of my divorce or my grief? Tell me a story. A couple others, I received some good advice when I was from a Chief Master Sergeant. I can give you some I will encourage you to be loyal to your boss by confronting your boss when she or he is wrong. The best loyalty I ever received is from someone telling me, "You're smoking dope on this, boss." I'll give you one of my dearest, again, I praise Chaplain Page. I'll tell you a story of Chaplain Page giving me some advice. And then I'll tell you about a Chaplain Richardson butt chewing I got. An endorser who did not have a chaplain on active duty called the chief's office when I was chief, and the executive officer was Father Tim Butler. This endorser started to cuss loudly, using the Lord's name, cussing at the executive officer, Father Butler. And he came into my office and said, "This person wants to talk to you." I had heard how that person had spoken, so I'm not going to talk to him. Not right now, I'm not going to. And then about an hour later, I still had steam coming out of my bald head. I was really mad. How could you talk to somebody like that? I want to talk to him. Chaplain Page came into my office, closed the door, and he gently said in his Pagean way, if you knew Chaplain Page, he said, "Sir, what do you expect to accomplish in this conversation?" The message was, don't do that. Don't get down in the gutter with that kind of behavior or person. It was his way of confronting me when I was dead wrong, when emotion was running my mouth as opposed to reason. And I'll finally give you one Cecil Richardson story, when I was counseled from above. I've been counseled from below, counseled from above, as we all need. There was a product when I was his deputy that came to his desk that needed some work. And he had some red markings on it. He said, "You know, H, I've been spending about 90 minutes on this, and let's clean that up maybe before it gets to my desk." A little pat on the shoulder, walked out of my office. Now that was nice. I thought, I just got a butt chewing from Chaplain Richardson. That's how he would chew you out. With a smile, with an embrace, and don't let that happen again. To read and be able to understand that which is coming from an airman or from a general officer, if you treat people with respect, if you love them, they will do the same.
Thank you, sir. Sir, for our final question, in what ways have you seen the integration of faith and spirituality positively impact the overall readiness of the Air and Space Force or Chaplain Corps?
Wow. Taking a holistic view of the profession of arms, I think, is the enterprise of the Chaplain Corps. To respect where each member warrior, we used to use that word, I don't know if that's still in use, each warrior has their own spirituality. And I've seen a continuum of no specific religion to very, very specific confessional religious positions. To respect that, when it is well integrated into their entire life, that is a more reliable warrior. When the integration is maybe, if not lifelong, it is well integrated into their personal life. I'll give an example. I'll give a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints example. I don't want to embarrass anybody from that, but I had a commander, a general officer, who was a very conservative Protestant, you might say. And he said, "I love having Mormons." "Okay, sir, why do you say that?" "I never have any trouble for Mormons. Not a bit of it. Know their job and they do it. Keep their mouth shut." And that kind of talk. What he was telling me is the integration of faith and life. Without judging, I don't think he was necessarily charitably inclined toward certain traditions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but appreciated what they were bringing to the profession of arms. It is essential, and that I think is a core value to which we must aspire in the Chaplain Corps, to look at what does that person bring to the profession of arms without giving judgment to its confessional validity from your perspective. Can I look at someone who's very different than I, affirm that, even if it's a variance with being an Evangelical Lutheran Church in America person, then I think you're being an effective chaplain. When a person is so compartmentalized their religious or spiritual life from their personal conduct, then that person cannot be relied upon. And I'll close with a quote from General George C. Marshall. In June of 1944, this is 7 months before Pearl Harbor, General Marshall, who is really a hero of mine, the only military general who received the Nobel Peace Prize, was speaking at a commencement address to Trinity College in Connecticut. And prescient soldier that he was, said before Pearl Harbor, it is the soldier's heart, the soldier's soul, the soldier's spirit. These are everything. Unless a soldier's soul supports him, in the end he will fail himself, his commander, and his country. It is the soul of the warrior that wins the victory. I'll never forget that little bit of Profession of Arms catechism. The integration of faith and life, without giving judgment as a Lutheran to what that may be, is probably the enterprise of the Chaplain Corps. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for doing the work you're so